The date is May 16th, 1811. The pre-dawn light is cold and grey, struggling to break over the rolling hills of Extremadura, Spain. By a shallow, insignificant stream called the Albuera, tens of thousands of men are waiting. The air is damp, heavy with the smell of wet wool, nervous sweat, and the wood smoke of 1,000 anxious campfires. This is not a battle of grand strategy. It is not a place that will be remembered for clever maneuvers or tactical finesse. It will be remembered as a contest of pure, stubborn butchery. The village of Albuera, a small collection of white-walled houses, sits near a stone bridge, and it is here that the Allied army expects the blow to fall. They are wrong. This confrontation is a bloody focal point in the long, grinding Peninsular War. The British, Spanish, and Portuguese are locked in a 6-year struggle to expel Napoleon's armies from Iberia. The Allies are commanded by General Sir William Beresford, a man known to be a proficient organizer but, crucially, a nervous and indecisive field commander. He is here to protect the siege of the vital fortress city of Badajoz. The French are coming to break that siege. Their commander is Marshal Nicolas Jean de Dieu Soult, one of France's most experienced and cunning leaders. He leads the Armée du Midi, a veteran force of 24,200 men. They are outnumbered, but they are a unified, professional, and battle-hardened army. Soult has marched his men hard, and he has a plan. He has no intention of fighting a simple frontal assault. He intends to find a weakness, and he believes he has found it in the very character of his opponent. Beresford has assembled a disparate army of 35,500 men. This number is a mirage of strength. It is a coalition held together by a common enemy. The corps consists of 10,500 British infantry, the red-coated professionals who have proven their dominance over the French in line. They are supported by 9,000 Portuguese, allies being trained and tempered into a capable fighting force. But the vast majority of the Allied army, 16,000 strong, belongs to the Spanish corps commanded by General Joaquin Blake. These Spanish troops are driven by a desperate hatred of the French invaders, but their armies have been repeatedly shattered over the past years. Their reliability in an open field battle is the great, terrifying unknown. Beresford has deployed his army on a long, low ridge. The terrain is open, a gentle swell of rolling hills with few trees or obstacles. It is, as one historian would later note, an excellent killing ground, offering no place to hide once the battle is joined. As the sun rises, the first probing movements begin. The men of the Allied army, British, Portuguese, and Spanish, check their flintlocks, fix their bayonets, and wait for the storm to break. They look to the village, to the bridge, where the first sounds of skirmish fire are beginning to rattle. But the true danger is not there. It is hidden, moving, and about to uncoil with devastating precision. The day will not be won by a general's plan, but by the raw, bloody-minded valor of the men who refuse to leave the field. The battle begins at approximately 8:30 a.m. Just as Beresford anticipated, the French move towards the village of Albuera and the stone bridge that crosses the narrow river. A brigade of French infantry, supported by cavalry, advances with purpose, their drums beating the pas de charge. Skirmishers from both sides fan out, and the morning air is immediately fouled by the sharp, acrid smell of black powder. The popping sound of individual muskets from the skirmish line is soon drowned out by the crash of controlled volleys from the German battalions in British service, who have been tasked with defending the village. Beresford, watching from his vantage point, sees the attack developing exactly where he expected it. It is a classic frontal assault. Believing this is the main French effort, he immediately commits his reserves to reinforce the centre, plugging the perceived gap and shoring up the defence of the bridge. But Marshal Soult is not a man of simple measures. This entire attack on the village is a brilliant and costly deception. While Beresford's attention is fixed on the bridge, the real French army is on the move. Miles away, hidden from view by the rolling hills and a dense wood, Soult's main striking force, some 15,000 men of his V-Corps, has been marching through the night. They have executed a wide, difficult flanking march, crossing the Albuera River further upstream, and are now in a position to strike the Allied army not in its strong centre, but on its weak and completely exposed right flank. At around 9 a.m., the deception is revealed. To the horror of the Allied command, a forest of steel bayonets and towering shakos emerges from behind the wood. This is not a brigade, it is an entire army. The V Corps, supported by cavalry and artillery, pivots and begins to ascend the long open slope that constitutes the Allied right. The flank is held by the 16,000 men of General Joaquin Blake's Spanish Corps. In an instant, the entire Allied battle line is rendered useless. They are facing the wrong way. Soult's plan has worked perfectly. He has turned the flank on a massive scale and now threatens to roll up Beresford's entire army from the side, pinning them against the river they have been so diligently defending. The Spanish are caught completely by surprise. Their line is in the air, meaning it is not anchored to any geographical feature. No river, no fortress, no forest. It is just a line of men on an open hill. The French advance in their classic columns, a dense formation that gives them shock and momentum, with artillery batteries unlimbering to tear bloody holes in the Spanish ranks. For General Blake, this is the ultimate test. His troops are derided by some of their British allies as unreliable. Now, they are all that stands between Soult and a catastrophic victory. The Spanish general gives a desperate, almost impossible order. His entire corps must pivot 90 degrees, on the spot, under fire, to form a new battle line that can face the oncoming French tide. The maneuver is chaotic, frantic. Men are shouting, officers are roaring. Regimental flags are moving in a confused mass as entire divisions try to untangle themselves and face the new threat. The battle for the bridge at Albuera is a footnote. The real battle, the battle for survival, has just begun on the ridge. The ridge, which moments before had been the quiet flank of the Allied army, explodes into a volcano of sound and violence. The French artillery, masters of their craft, have unlimbered with terrifying speed. A battery of guns opens fire, hurling round shot and canister into the dense, confused mass of Spanish soldiers. General Blake's men are still in the process of their desperate pivot, a chaotic maneuver that is difficult enough on a parade ground, let alone under the fire of 15,000 advancing enemies. Regiments are tangled, companies are mixed, and the men are shoulder to shoulder, trying to form a line to face the assault. The French Five Corps, sensing a quick and total victory, advances steadily up the slope, their great columns looking like an unstoppable blue tide. This is the moment Soult has engineered. He expects the Spanish, who have a reputation for breaking in the field, to shatter and flee. A collapse here would be decisive. But the Spanish do not run. Fired by a bitter hatred for the French occupiers, and perhaps by the sheer desperation of their position, Blake's divisions miraculously complete their turn. They form a new front, a long, wavering line of men, and prepare to receive the shock. The French columns, shouting, "Vive l'Empereur!" or crash into the Spanish line. The fighting is immediate, brutal, and at point-blank range. The Spanish, contrary to the low expectations of some of their British allies, stand and fight with a courage that is nothing short of heroic. For over an hour, this uneven contest rages. The Spanish line, outnumbered and outgunned at the point of attack, refuses to break. They are locked in a desperate firefight. The French columns, designed for shock, try to punch through, but the Spanish infantry, despite their disorganization, meet them with volley after volley. The Brown Bess muskets of the British-supplied regiments and the Spanish-made muskets create a continuous, deafening roar. The acrid, sulphurous smoke of the black powder hangs thick and low over the ridge, obscuring the field, mixing with the morning mist. Men are falling by the hundreds. The Spanish are holding, but they are being ground down. They are trading their lives, yard by yard, for precious minutes. This heroic, desperate stand is the most critical and unsung phase of the battle. General Beresford, the Allied commander, is miles away, his attention still divided by the feint at the bridge. It takes an agonizingly long time for the reality of the situation to reach him, that his entire flank has been turned, that the battle is not where he thought it was, and that 16,000 Spanish soldiers are currently the only thing standing between his army and annihilation. The sound of the cannonade from the ridge is a growing, terrifying thunder that finally confirms the disaster. He must react. He must shift his entire army to meet this new threat. He turns to his best troops, the elite British 2nd Division, commanded by the aggressive Major General William Stewart. He gives the order, march to the ridge, reinforce the Spanish, and stop the French. As Stewart's 6,000 men begin their frantic march, they have no idea what they are walking into. They are marching towards a disaster of their own, one that will be set in motion by a freak act of nature and the most feared cavalry on the continent. As the Spanish line begins to buckle, General Stewart's 2nd Division finally arrives. This division, numbering around 6,000 men, is a blade of tempered British steel. Stewart, an aggressive and reckless commander, wastes no time. Seeing the crisis unfolding, he orders his 1st Brigade, commanded by Colonel John Colborne, to advance immediately. Colborne's men, veterans all, begin to deploy from their marching columns into the famous British two-deep line formation. This thin red line is their greatest strength, a tactic designed to maximize the firepower of their Brown Bess muskets, pouring devastating, disciplined volleys into the French columns. The 3rd Foot, known as the Buffs, and other proud regiments in the brigade advance confidently, expecting to sweep the French from the ridge as they have done so many times before. They march forward, past the shattered, bleeding remnants of the Spanish who are now falling back, and move towards the main French infantry. But as they begin their advance, the battlefield is suddenly transformed by an act of God. At approximately 10 a.m., the sky, already dark with gunpowder smoke, rips open. A freak storm, a localized and violent squall, unleashes a torrent of hail and rain upon the field. The wind howls, driving the rain in blinding sheets. In an instant, visibility drops to just a few yards. The world is reduced to a chaotic grey murk, a disorienting hell of lashing rain, the screams of the wounded, and the deafening muffled roar of the battle, now just a ghost in the noise. Through this blinding chaos, a new and terrible threat is moving, unseen and unheard. Marshal Soult has his cavalry in support, and among them is the 1st Vistula Legion, the Polish Lancers. Commanded by Colonel Jan Konopka, these are arguably the most feared light cavalry in the world. They are not armed with sabres, but with 9-foot steel-tipped lances, a weapon that gives them a terrifying reach advantage. As Colborne's brigade advances blindly through the storm, their line is struck by this sudden, supernatural tempest. They are in the open, in their two-deep line, a formation that is a death trap when hit by cavalry. The British infantry's defence against horsemen is the square, a dense, bristling hedgehog of bayonets. But they have no time. They cannot see the threat until it is upon them. At 10:15 a.m., the Lancers charge out of the rain. They hit Colborne's brigade like a thunderbolt. The British infantry, caught in their vulnerable line formation, can do nothing. The 9-foot Lancers are devastating, piercing red coats and pinning men to the muddy earth. The Lancers ride down the line, spearing the infantrymen at will, turning the disciplined formation into a panicked, screaming mob. The attack is a total, unmitigated slaughter. In the space of just a few minutes, Colborne's brigade is annihilated. The Lancers not only destroy the infantry, but also overrun a British artillery battery that was moving up to support them. They capture 5 regimental standards, a humiliation that cuts deeper than any wound. This single, devastating charge, enabled by the storm, has ripped the heart out of Stewart's initial attack. The entire Allied right flank is no longer just in jeopardy. It has ceased to exist. The rain and hail recede as quickly as they came, pulling back like a curtain to reveal a scene of absolute horror. Where Colonel Colborne's proud brigade of 1,600 men had stood, there is now only a scattered, mangled ruin of red coats. The muddy slope is a carpet of dead and dying, many still impaled by the lances. The Polish cavalry, having inflicted one of the most complete and rapid destructions of a British brigade in the entire war, are victorious, but the battle is far from over. The French 5th Corps, having seen its cavalry clear the field, reforms its dense columns and continues its inexorable advance, confident that the Allied right is broken. Major General Stuart, the 2nd Division's commander, is a man of raw aggression, and what he does next is born of either sheer fury or tactical panic. His 1st Brigade is gone. He now commits his 2nd. He orders Major General Daniel Houghton to lead his brigade forward, straight into the vortex. Houghton's men, including the 29th Foot, the 48th, and the 57th West Middlesex, advance not with the parade ground precision of Colborne's men, but with a grim, vengeful purpose. They must literally step over and through the dismembered wreckage of their sister brigade. They see the captured guns, the lost colours, and the bodies of their comrades. Houghton's brigade does not make the same mistake. They see the French cavalry milling about, but their primary threat is the looming mass of French infantry. At 10:30 a.m., in an act of supreme, almost suicidal discipline, Houghton's brigade deploys into a perfect two-rank line. The French infantry, sensing the moment, also halt their advance and deploy, fanning out from their columns into a competing line. What happens next is a tactical anomaly in the Peninsular War. This is not a battle of column versus line. It is a battle of line versus line. The two forces, British and French, stand facing each other at a murderous distance, estimated by survivors to be between 20 and 30 yards. This is a range at which the Brown Bess and Charleville muskets, normally inaccurate weapons, cannot miss. There is no more manoeuvre. There is no more tactic. There is only killing. The central slugfest begins. For nearly an hour, the two lines stand and trade continuous rolling volleys at point-blank range. The sound is not of individual shots, but a single deafening, continuous roar, a terrible crash that never ceases. The acrid, sulphurous smoke from the black powder is so thick and choking that it blots out the sun, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Men are simply loading and firing into the grey-black wall of smoke in front of them, knowing that an equal wall of lead is coming back. This is where the 57th Foot earns its immortal name. At the head of his men is their commander, Colonel William Inglis. An enemy cannon fires a round of canister shot, a tin filled with musket balls that turns the gun into a giant shotgun. The blast rips through the 57th's line, and Colonel Inglis is struck down, grievously wounded. His men try to carry him to the rear, but he refuses. Knowing that the line is wavering, that any sign of retreat could cause a rout, Inglis orders them to leave him. He remains on the ground, lying next to the regimental colours, a visible and defiant anchor. As the French volleys tear his regiment apart, he is heard roaring over the din, his voice a beacon of pure stubbornness. "Die hard, 57th, die hard!" The men of the 57th obey. They stand their ground, absorbing the punishment, and die where they stand. They will forever be known as the diehards. The order to die hard is not a metaphor. It is a literal bloody instruction, and the men of Houghton's brigade are following it to the letter. This is the epicenter of the slugfest. For the better part of an hour, the 2nd Brigade stands rooted to its patch of muddy ground, trading death with the French 5th Corps at a range so close that the men can see the faces of their enemies in the brief, swirling gaps in the powder smoke. Major General Daniel Houghton, the man who led them into this inferno, is killed, falling at the head of his men. His brigade is systematically erased from the field, man by man, file by file. The 57th Foot, the diehards, are a testament to this brutality. Of the 570 men who advanced up that ridge, 422 are now killed or wounded. The 29th and 48th Foot are in a similar state. Their red lines now just scattered clusters of survivors, still stubbornly loading and firing. The ground beneath them is a thick, sodden carpet of the dead and dying, a grotesque pile of blue French uniforms and red British coats, often lying in their perfect line formations, having been killed too fast to even fall in disarray. This is the butchery the battle will be remembered for. Survivors would later recall that a small stream running from the fatal hill was so choked with bodies and blood that it was seen running red towards the Albuera River. From his command post, General Sir William Beresford watches this unfold. He is not a Wellington, cool and unshakable in a crisis. He is a proficient organizer, but the strain of field command, of watching his elite troops be butchered on an open hillside, unhinges him. The destruction of Colborne's brigade by the Lancers was a disaster. The near-total annihilation of Houghton's brigade in this meat grinder is a catastrophe. He sees only a gaping, bloody hole in his line, a hole that his panicked mind believes cannot be filled. He has no more reserves to commit that he trusts. The Spanish are holding, but are exhausted. The Portuguese are engaged elsewhere. His British 2nd Division, the core of his strength, has been sacrificed. At approximately 11:30 a.m., at the absolute climax of the fighting, Beresford cracks. Witnesses describe him as nearly hysterical. He has lost control of the battle and, more importantly, of himself. Convinced the day is lost, he rides to his staff and begins to draft the orders for a general retreat. He is ready to give up the field, to concede Badajoz, to admit defeat. He sees no other option. At this precise moment, the Allied army is effectively leaderless. While Colonel Inglis is on the ground roaring for his men to die hard, the army's commander-in-chief is preparing to order the survivors to run. The battle hangs by the thinnest possible thread. Marshal Soult, who has also committed his last reserves, can see the Allied line wavering. He is one more push away from a total victory. The fate of the battle now rests not with the commander, but with the initiative of a single man who is watching and defying the unfolding panic. At the very moment of Beresford's collapse, as the orders for a full retreat are being drafted, salvation comes from a man who decides that initiative is superior to obedience. Major General Sir Lowry Cole, commander of the 4th Division, has been watching. His men, including the elite Fusilier Brigade, have been held in reserve, agonizingly close to the slaughter, but uncommitted. Cole is a different breed of commander from Beresford. He is steady, professional, and he understands what he is seeing. He sees not an unstoppable French victory, but an exhausted French V-Corps that has punched itself out on the iron valor of Houghton's men. He sees an opportunity, not a disaster. A staff officer, frantic, rides up to Cole, relaying the command's panic and the intent to retreat. Cole, in what is perhaps the most decisive act of the war, makes a calculated, unauthorized decision. He will not retreat. He will attack. On his own initiative, at approximately 12 p.m., he gives the order for the 7th Foot, Royal Fusiliers, and the 23rd Foot, Royal Welch Fusiliers, to advance. He is, in effect, countermanding his own commander-in-chief and staking the entire battle on the discipline of his 2 regiments. This is the turning point of the day. The Fusilier Brigade, fresh and untouched, advances with the chilling precision of a parade ground drill. They march in perfect line, their drums beating a steady rhythm, a river of fresh red coats and white crossbelts flowing directly into the heart of the battle. Their advance is one of the most poignant and terrible sights in British military history. To get to the enemy, they must first march through the remnants of the 2nd Division. They step over the grotesque piled heaps of the 57th and 48th, past the 1,500 unwounded men who are all that remain of a 6,000-man division. The survivors of Houghton's brigade, blackened by smoke, their uniforms in bloody rags, see this fresh line coming. They part, letting the Fusiliers pass through, and as they do, these shattered diehards raise a weak but defiant huzzah. The French V-Corps, who have been fighting for hours and believe the British are broken, look up in horror. Instead of a retreating rabble, they see a new, perfect, two-deep line of infantry bearing down on them, bayonets gleaming. At 12:15 p.m, Cole's Fusiliers halt. They are on the flank of the exhausted French, who are still in their now disorganized line. The Fusiliers level over 1,500 Brown Bess muskets and, at their officer's command, deliver a perfect volley. The crash of gunfire is singular, disciplined, and utterly devastating. It rips into the exposed side of the French formation, but the Fusiliers do not stop to reload. Cole has ordered a bayonet charge. Before the French can recover from the shock of the volley, the British line roars and surges forward. Simultaneously, the 3rd Brigade of the 2nd Division, commanded by Abercrombie, which had been held in reserve, advances on the other French flank. The exhausted French Vague Corps, having withstood the Spanish, destroyed one British brigade, and fought a second to a bloody standstill, is now hit from 2 sides at once by fresh charging infantry. The shock is total. The French Vague Corps, an elite formation of veterans, had endured hours of non-stop, brutal combat. They had marched all night, engaged the Spanish, weathered a hailstorm, been checked by Houghton's brigade, and fought a point-blank slugfest for the better part of an hour. They were exhausted, their ammunition was low, and their resolve was at its breaking point. Cole's volley was a stunning shock, but the sight of fresh, screaming infantry charging with the bayonet from one flank, and Abercrombie's brigade hitting them from the other, was more than they could bear. The psychological dam broke. At approximately 1 p.m., the V Corps disintegrated. This was not an orderly fighting withdrawal. It was a sudden, chaotic collapse. The French line, which had held for so long, simply dissolved. Men threw down their muskets and ran for their lives, streaming back down the slope they had so confidently advanced up hours before. The British Fusiliers, roaring their triumph, pursued them, their bayonets exacting a terrible price. The hill that had been the centre of the world's most intense firefight was suddenly and decisively cleared of all organised French resistance. From his vantage point, Marshal Soult watched his grand plan unravel in a matter of minutes. His cavalry, including the victorious Polish lancers, tried to form a screen to protect the fleeing infantry, but the momentum of the Allied counterattack was too great. Soult's V Corps, the primary instrument of his army, was effectively destroyed as a fighting force. The brief confirms he had already committed his last reserves. He had nothing left to throw into the fight. His brilliant flanking maneuver had been defeated by a level of stubbornness he could not have anticipated. Soult, a pragmatist, knew the battle was lost. He had no choice but to order a general withdrawal. He organised his remaining unengaged divisions and his artillery to form a rearguard, a desperate measure to prevent the collapse of the V Corps from turning into the destruction of his entire army. The French cannons opened fire, not to win the hill, but to cover the retreat, holding the victorious British at bay long enough for the survivors to escape. The Allies were in no condition to pursue. The British 2nd Division was a wreck. The 4th Division, though victorious, was exhausted and disorganised by its own charge. The Spanish were battered. The entire army was a shattered, bleeding mass. They had just enough strength to hold the ground they had bought so dearly. As the French army sullenly pulled back across the Albuera River, the firing began to die down. The deafening and continuous roar of musketry faded, replaced by the horrifying, large-scale sound of human suffering. The screams and groans of thousands of wounded men from all 4 nations who now lay scattered across the fatal hill. The battle was over. The Allies, by the slimmest of margins, were left in triumphant possession of the field. The smoke, a thick, choking pall of sulphur, still hung heavy in the damp air, refusing to clear. But the terrible crash of musketry, the continuous roar that had defined the day, was gone. In its place was a sound that haunted survivors for the rest of their lives: the collective, agonizing cry of the wounded. The battle was over, and the cost was now being counted, not in captured standards or tactical objectives, but in human life. The ridge, the epicenter of the fighting, was a sight that defied description. A British officer, looking upon the scene, was stunned. He wrote that he had seen fields of battle before, but never one so choked with the dead and dying. The numbers confirmed the horror. This was, by every measure, the bloodiest battle of the Peninsular War. The Allied army, though victorious, had paid an appalling price. General Beresford's 35,500-man army had suffered nearly 6,000 casualties. But this figure, spread across the whole, hid the terrible truth of what had happened to the British infantry. The 2nd Division, the unit that had borne the brunt of the slugfest, had effectively ceased to exist. Numbering around 6,000 men when the battle began, the division had suffered over 4,000 casualties in just a few hours. This was a casualty rate of over 65%, a level of destruction almost unheard of. The fate of the diehards, the 57th Foot, was the battle in miniature. Of the 570 men who had followed Colonel Inglis into the fray, 422 were now killed or wounded. They had obeyed their commander's order to the letter. This was the context for the most famous and most chilling description of the battle, penned by the great historian Sir William Napier. He wrote that when the smoke cleared, all that remained of Stuart's division, the men who had held the line, were 1,500 unwounded men, the remnant of 6,000, who stood triumphant on the fatal hill. The phrase fatal hill would stick, a permanent epitaph for the ridge at Albuera. The French had paid just as dearly. Marshal Soult's army of 24,200 had suffered even greater losses, estimated to be at least 7,000. His V Corps, the elite striking force that had so brilliantly turned Beresford's flank, was a complete wreck. It had been shattered, first by the stubbornness of the diehards, and then by the decisive bayonet charge of the Fusiliers. Soult had not just been defeated, he had been crippled. But for the men on the field, these were just numbers. The reality was the terrain itself. The ridge was a grotesque carpet of bodies, piled in heaps. The red coats of the British and the blue of the French were jumbled together in their perfect two-deep formations, men having died side by side without ever taking a step back. The ground was slick with blood. A shallow stream that ran from the hill down to the Albuera River, a simple drainage ditch, was observed by survivors to be running red. So thick was it with the blood of the thousands who had fallen on the slope above. The work of the surgeons in the cold, damp twilight was just beginning. The butchery at Albuera was not a crime of passion. It was a feat of industrial-scale killing, carried on for hours, made possible by the simple, brutal technology of the era. The primary weapon for all 3 infantry armies, British, French, and Spanish, was the smoothbore, flintlock musket. The British carried the Brown Bess, a 75 caliber weapon. The French carried their 69 caliber Charleville. These were not accurate weapons. An individual soldier had little hope of hitting a specific man beyond 50 or 60 yards. But the battle was not fought by individuals. It was fought by disciplined formations, and the muskets were not rifles, but volley guns. The British thin red line, 2 ranks deep, was a human machine designed to maximize the output of these weapons. At Albuera, specifically during the slugfest phase, this machine was put to its ultimate test. Houghton's brigade, standing just 20 or 30 yards from the French, was essentially a firing squad, 200 men long. At this range, the Brown Bess was horrific. Its heavy, 75 caliber lead ball, nearly an inch wide, did not just pierce a man. It smashed through him, shattering bone and creating catastrophic exit wounds. A man hit in the torso was almost certainly doomed. The sheer volume of fire was what mattered. In that continuous, deafening roar, thousands of these lead balls were crossing the narrow gap every minute, shredding the 2 lines of men. The artillery was the second killer. The cannons fired round shot, solid iron balls that bounded across the open ground, tearing through files of men as if they were paper. But at close range, they fired canister shot. This was a tin or bag filled with dozens of musket balls, which, when fired, turned the cannon into a giant shotgun. It was a round of canister that struck down Colonel William Inglis of the 50th, and it was canister that ripped bloody holes in the dense formations as they stood and reloaded. But the most high-tech and psychologically terrifying weapon on the field was the 9-foot lance of the Polish Vistula Legion. This weapon was a game-changer. It gave the cavalryman a reach that no infantryman with a musket and bayonet could counter. Against a man on foot, it was a spear that could be driven with the full weight of a charging horse. The destruction of Colborne's brigade was a testament to its effectiveness. The lancers simply rode down the line, spearing the red-coated infantry, who were helpless. The lance, a weapon that seemed almost medieval, had proven itself to be horrifyingly modern in its ability to annihilate a disciplined, musket-armed infantry line that was caught out of its protective square formation. It was this combination of close-range musket volleys, devastating canister, and the terrifying reach of the lance that made Albuera a butcher's yard. Albuera was not, as the Duke of Wellington would later famously and dryly remark, a battle of manoeuvres. It was a brutal lesson in the fundamental bloody arithmetic of Napoleonic warfare. It laid bare both the strengths and the catastrophic weaknesses of the armies that fought it. The most devastating tactical lesson of the day came from the Polish lancers. The British infantry, secure in their dominance, had become complacent. Their thin red line was the undisputed king of the infantry firefight, a machine that could outshoot any French column. But it had one fatal vulnerability. When caught in line, it was utterly defenseless against a determined cavalry charge. The destruction of Colborne's brigade was a textbook example of this weakness. The infantry square was the standard and only defence. A dense, four-sided hedgehog of men and bayonets, the square presented a wall of steel to a charging horse that no animal would willingly impale itself upon. But Colborne, blinded by the rain and advancing in line, never had the chance to form one. The lancers exploited this failure with ruthless efficiency, proving that the British line was a specialised tool, not a universal one. Its strength in one dimension was matched by its total fragility in another. Conversely, the battle's central slugfest was the ultimate vindication of that same line formation's firepower. The French advanced in their typical columns. This formation was excellent for manoeuvre, for moving troops across a battlefield, and for delivering a shock punch with the bayonet. But when a column deployed into a line to trade volleys, it was at a disadvantage. And when it remained in a dense column, it presented a perfect deep target for the too deep British line, which could bring far more muskets to bear. Albuera was unique because it degenerated into a rare line-versus-line firefight at point-blank range. Houghton's brigade, standing just 20 yards from their French counterparts, was a demonstration of sheer, stubborn firepower. The formation maximised the number of Brown Bess muskets that could be fired at once, creating a wall of lead that the French, in their own line, had to endure. This was not a contest of tactics, it was a contest of will. It was an equation of attrition. Who could stand and absorb death the longest? The diehards of the 57th proved that they could, but at a cost that was almost indistinguishable from annihilation. In the end, the battle was a story of two commanders. Marshal Soult's plan was tactically brilliant. His feint at the bridge and his wide, concealed flanking march to strike the Allied right was a masterpiece of manoeuvre. It worked perfectly. He completely surprised Beresford and should have won the battle in the first 90 minutes. He was only defeated by factors he could not control: the heroic, unexpected stand of Blake's Spanish troops and the suicidal, inhuman stubbornness of the British 2nd Division, who simply refused to break. General Sir William Beresford, by contrast, had failed. He was completely outgeneraled by Soult, took the bait, lost control of the battle, and, in his panic, nearly ordered a retreat at the very moment his men were winning. The victory at Albuera did not belong to him. It belonged to General Blake, whose Spanish troops bought the crucial time. It belonged to the diehards and Colonel Inglis, who held the line. And ultimately, it belonged to Major General Sir Lowry Cole, the 4th Division commander who, on his own initiative, defied the panic and ordered the unauthorized, battle-winning bayonet charge of the Fusiliers. In the cold light of the following day, the true nature of the victory at Albuera became clear. It was a victory, but it felt like a funeral. Marshal Soult had withdrawn, his army crippled, his plan in ruins. The French siege of Badajoz was, for the moment, broken. But the Allied army was in no state to celebrate. It was too busy burying its dead. The field was a charnel house, a vast open-air morgue where recovery parties worked to separate the thousands of dead from the thousands of wounded. For General Sir William Beresford, the battle was a personal and professional humiliation. He had been comprehensively outgeneraled, surprised, and had very nearly lost his army. He had been saved only by the initiative of his subordinates and the staggering, almost inhuman valour of his infantry. When the Duke of Wellington eventually arrived and was briefed on the day's events and the catastrophic casualty list, his cold fury was legendary. The butcher's bill was simply too high. Beresford, though he had technically held the field, had failed in the primary duty of a general, to preserve his own army. The battle would not be remembered for his generalship. It would not be remembered for Soult's brilliant but failed manoeuvre. Albuera's legacy was forged in the 40-minute, 30-yard killing match on the fatal hill. It was a legacy written in the blood of the 2nd Division. The story of Colonel William Inglis, wounded and prostrate on the ground, roaring, "Die hard, 57th, die hard," over the din, became an instant legend. It was more than a command. It was the embodiment of the battle itself. It became the new motto for the regiment, a name, the Diehards, that would be carried with honour for centuries, a permanent testament to what they had endured. The battle solidified the reputation of the British infantry as the most stubborn, immovable, and terrifyingly disciplined soldiers in the world. They had proven, once again, that their two-deep line could absorb and defeat any French column. But at Albuera, they had proven something more, that they could stand in a line-versus-line firefight at near point-blank range and trade their lives one for one until the enemy broke first. They had been annihilated, but they had not been moved. History would come to validate the initial premise. Albuera was not a battle of clever tactics. It was, as the brief confirms, a contest of pure, stubborn butchery. It was a raw, primal slugfest, where British, Spanish, and French brigades stood yards apart and exchanged volleys until they were erased. The victory was a grim one. It was a victory won not by a commander, but by the 1,500 unwounded men who, as the last survivors of their division, stood triumphant on the fatal hill. They had done nothing more and nothing less than die harder than their enemy. And in the long, brutal story of the Peninsular War, that on this day was just enough. Thank you for listening to our story. If you found this battle as fascinating as we did, please like this video and subscribe to British War History for more. We read all of your comments, so be sure to leave your thoughts below. We'll see you in the next video.